Wow, great crowd, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm very excited. I met Nick about 13 years ago while working with the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, and he had taken a red eye out to introduce Colin Firth, his good friend Colin Firth. And of course, everybody bum rushed Colin Firth. There's one lone geek out there who went out to Nick Hornby. He was very kind. Didn't have to call security on me too much, and he was a very great gentleman, and I've been a fan of his ever since. Nick Hornby, of course, as you know, has written 7 best-selling novels, including High Fidelity, About a Boy, A Long Way Down, as well as several works of nonfiction, including Fever Pitch, as well as tonight's book, Dickens in Print. So I hope you get the copy. It's a really neat book about 2 wonderful artists. So please welcome Nick Hornby.
Thank you.
2-time Oscar nominee, 3-time Emmy Award winner. I'm just in awe of being in your presence.
And I'm very happy to be here.
In fact, as everybody knows, I can't talk right now, so I'm going to bring in the A-team here to talk to a wonderful author named Jessica Anya Blau. Come on out here, Jessica. She's written wonderful books, Closer to Home, Summer of Naked Swim Parties, which is one of the best titles I've ever. And her latest, of course, which is set in Baltimore, the wonderful Mary Jane. So thank you for coming, and take it away, you guys. And go Arsenal.
Right, so I have my phone because I couldn't find any paper or pen, so I wrote my questions for Nick on the phone. So, but I did turn it off. All right, hi.
Hello.
Hey. So the book. Okay, so we're gonna start talking about the book. So first of all, so Dickens and Prince, and how did you ever bring these two together, or why?
Why?
Yeah.
Yeah, why is a good question. So a couple of years ago, Prince's estate released this massive box set for the Sign of the Times record, and on the original record there's like 20 songs, and on this extra special edition usually you get 2 or 3 maybe extra tracks that were recorded at the time, or a live one or something when they do these re-releases. There were 86 new tracks, which was 4 times the size of the original album. And when I was reading about it, one of the things that people were pointing out was that he was recording 3 records at once, all really different. And I thought, oh, that's weird. Dickens used to write 2 books at once. And I just started thinking about them and thinking that there were lots of overlaps when I started thinking about it. And the first big one, apart from that writing 2 things at once, is that they both, neither of them lived till 60. They died within about 6 months of each other, as it were, in lifespan. And I began to wonder whether it was work that killed them, because they both did so much work, and it went on from there. When Dickens was 25, he wrote Oliver Twist. When Prince was 25, he released Purple Rain.
Oh, wow.
They were both megastars, and it started to make more and more sense, because probably Dickens was one of the very few megastars of the 19th century, in that he cracked America, and it was very difficult for European people to crack America.
Right.
You got the language for a start, and Dickens was hugely successful here and came on reading tours here, which were mobbed, and so it just became interesting to compare their careers. And then they both had weird things with women, and
By the way, I can't believe Prince was 25 at Purple Rain.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that album. All-time favorite. But like, what with weird things with women?
What weird things with women?
I mean, I know Prince. Well, and actually, I read the book, so I know it all. But I'm pretending I don't.
Well, Prince wasn't as far as we know, terrible to women, and he never got cancelled. And there were thousands of women in his life. You know, he didn't have a very settled home life. He dated just about every model and musician that caught his eye. But especially in the 80s, he did this weird thing, like everyone he slept with, he had to make an album with first. So there's this string of records that you'd probably never want to listen to again. And his manager said to him, when are you going to stop, there's some terrible phrase, when are you going to realise you don't have to give somebody a contract before you fuck them? You know, you're a rock star.
Right.
But
You mean you could do it without the contract?
you could do it without the making
Right.
of the record. But there were about 10 or 15 of these albums
Wow.
by
Well,
solo
and then
artists.
we had dinner the other night with somebody who we won't name, who Prince was pursuing to make an album and maybe have sex with.
Yes.
But she turned him down.
She turned him down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was Prince's slightly weird thing. While at the same time being very generous to women musicians, and you know his bands were frequently at least half women, and one of the
Lisa
last
and
Lisa and Wendy.
Wendy, who I love.
But his last band was all women apart from him.
Right.
So you know his recording engineer was a woman, very unusually in the 80s and 90s. A woman called Susan Rogers, who's got a really good book out about sound, and she's now a sound or music psychologist, I believe.
Oh.
So she was smart as well. Dickens's was quite weird, which was that he was very clearly in love with his young sister-in-law. He was married, but the sister-in-law lived at home with them, and she died very young, and he was grief-stricken. He never really recovered from it for the rest of his life. And you know, we all love our sisters-in-law, I'm sure. But you're not necessarily going to spend the rest of your life grieving if oh,
I have to
is it a
take one.
football score?
Yes, this is a football score. Arsenal.
Anyway, he sort of tried to replicate that a few times. He kept falling in love with young women, and he didn't do anything about it until towards the end of his life, where he had an affair with a young actress, and he probably died at her house, or was dying at her house, and she shoved him in a carriage and sent him home so that he died in his own house. In fact, as I say in the book, they both died in movement because Prince was found in a lift.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so they both were moving.
elevator.
Even, yeah. Oh, speak a little louder. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, everyone, if you missed all that. It was really good stuff. It's more or less unrepeatable. The moment will never be recaptured.
So, right, so they both died in a enclosed capsule, a car and an elevator.
And they were in movement, or yes, it
Right.
seems like they were in movement, which
Right.
is, given how, as it were, how fast they lived in terms of what they packed into their years, is entirely typical.
Right. Now, if you had to have dinner with one, my questions are on here. If you had to have dinner with one, who would you hang out with?
Well, if I had to have dinner with one of these two people, Dickens or Prince, I would. I mean, one of them was really social, and that was Dickens, and one of them clearly had great difficulty in relating to people, and that was Prince.
Right.
So, even though I probably admire them both equally, I think Dickens would give you a better time as a dinner guest. He was into the party games, and he liked to drink, and he liked to eat, and he loved going out. And Prince, I think, wasn't
Right.
that guy. Although somebody did tell me a really great story about Prince. A guy I know in LA had a friend who was a kind of man about town, a bit of a playboy, and they were in this club. This guy was in this club with a bunch of girls, and a guy came over and said, "Would you mind if Prince sat at your table?" And he looked round, and there was this little figure hiding behind a pillar. And he said, "No, sure." And so Prince came down, sat in between all the girls, didn't say a word, completely killed the vibe that they were and then started asking this guy that I know through a friend whether he was a musician. And this guy said, yes, I'm a drummer. I mean, I'm not a great drummer, but I have a drum kit. And Prince was asking him question after question about his drums and how they were set up and what was the make of kit. And then a few days later, he got a call, and he didn't know where it came from, saying, would you come by Prince's house tonight in LA? And so he drove out, and they said, come at midnight, of course. So he went up at midnight, he walked around the back because he couldn't see anything at the front, and at the back was a studio, and when he opened the sliding door, there was the drum kit set up exactly as he'd described to the guy in the club.
Same brand.
Same brand, same, you know, with the hi-hat here and da-da-da. He described and Prince had it set up exactly for him. So Prince walked in and said to this guy, the most terrifying, if you're a musician, the most frightening words you'll ever hear. Prince said to him, play something funky. Anyway, he had to go, and he sat down, and then Prince said, pretty good, and picked up a guitar and started playing rhythm for the drums, and then snapped his fingers, and a 10-piece band walked in, including backing vocals and a horn section, who were just available to play privately at midnight, and they jammed for 2 hours. Prince said, thanks very much, and then that was it. He never heard from him again. And I presume that a lot of people have these kinds of stories.
Well,
about
what about,
Prince.
and I found in the book, after concerts, what Prince would do?
Well, after concerts, Prince would play a concert. When they arrived in a city, his guys would go out, scope a local club, and then he'd play till 11, have a couple of hours off, and then at 1 o'clock they'd turn up at this club, and they'd tell everyone who was in the club that Prince was about to play, and then Prince would do a show from 1 till 4.
For free?
For free, yeah.
Whoever's in this tiny club.
Whoever's in this tiny club. It's say for free, but there's a guy I know who's a famous newsreader in the UK. When I told him he was writing this, he told me this story that he'd gone down to a disco in my part of North London for his 40th birthday, and his wife had bought tickets for this 80s disco, and when they showed the tickets at the door, the guy said, these are no good anymore, there's something else going on. And his wife kicked up a bit of a fuss and said, it's his birthday, we've come for the 80s disco. And they said, okay, come in, and it was a whole Prince show. That's what he got for his 40th birthday.
That's great. All right, so Dickens, anything like that? The after show,
Well, his performances, his readings were apparently spectacular, and he would inhabit the bodies of his characters. He wouldn't just read, it would be acting.
Right.
And he ended up apparently completely exhausted and spent, to have a lie down after his readings. Meanwhile, in the audience, they were all crying and cries of horror when Bill Sikes kills Nancy, and it was the full 9 yards, with full performance. And what struck me as interesting is that both Dickens and Prince worked out quite late on in their lives that the thing that sold was a greatest hits performance. So Prince would always do the thing of, I don't play my old stuff, I'm only playing from the new album, and in the 90s and early 2000s those new albums were not what fans wanted to hear.
right.
But then at the end he started doing these shows, and they were all greatest hits, and Dickens did greatest hits readings. He wasn't
Right.
just promoting the new books, he chose self-enclosed
Right.
pieces from all the books, and they both had big beefs with the business as well. When Dickens was published here, you Americans didn't ask for anyone's permission, so publishers just published the books. There were no contracts. He
No
didn't get
royalties.
no royalties,
No advance.
no advance. He just heard that they were being published here. And when he came here for the first time to do a reading, he tried to raise the subject of him not having any royalties,
Right.
and he was more or less run out of town for daring to suggest that he was entitled to anything. And there were editorials in newspapers saying that he was really vulgar, and if that's all he'd come to do was to talk about money, then he could bloody well go off home again. And in fact, there was only one court case during his lifetime involving the publication of his books, and that was two publishers trying to sue each other for who had the right to publish him. They had no rights to publish him. They took each other to court.
Did he ever get royalty or paid?
Towards the end, he got an agreement that people would publish the part works. Dickens published in serial form,
Right.
and always, and a book didn't come out until the end of the serialization.
Right.
So I think that eventually he had an arrangement with publishers here that they would publish
Right.
the part works.
Right. So Dickens had that with the publishers, and Prince, we know, became the artist formerly.
Well, the artist formerly known as Prince, and he walked around with slave on his cheek because of his beef
Right.
with the record company, which, when you examine it closely, it's kind of hard to feel his pain.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, he was paid quite a lot of money, and most of the complaint was that he made too many records, and they wouldn't release them all.
Oh.
He just recorded all the time, and the record company said, look, we have to get behind a record, and
Right.
it takes a long time,
Right.
and we promote it and put together a tour, and we cannot bring out 4 albums a year, which is what he wanted
Right.
to do. And he also worked out that he would never be able to get his advance back because the sales targets were so high. But the advance was very large indeed. So
Right.
I think they couldn't quite understand why he was a slave.
So it's the same in records. You get an advance and then you get royalties. Yeah.
We have a musician. Oh,
Yes.
he's glazed over.
Not anymore.
No, not anymore.
It's not the same, but it was the
Well,
same.
yeah, it's the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So wait, so they would do their greatest hits. If you were going to do your greatest hits, what would you do?
No, the fans want to hear something off the, like the B-sides and stuff.
What's your B? You don't have a B-side.
I have B-sides. I like State of the Union, and I think that's a bit of a B-side.
Here,
Yeah.
not in English. Yeah, so what's the difference between your English career and your American career?
Well, that's interesting because there is a difference. And in England, my first book was, well, here as well actually, but no one noticed. But my first book was Fever Pitch, about my relationship with Arsenal Football Club, and it didn't go so great here.
Here.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
career began with High Fidelity here, but in England and Europe, in fact, this book just started selling and selling and selling. I've got to say, I've been trying to write since I was 25, and I was 35 when this book came out. So I was like a 10-year overnight success. And it was in the bestseller list for 6 months, and
In England.
in England, and I became known as the football guy. And to give you an example, I went to a podiatrist quite recently, and she looked at my name. She said, "I know your name." I said, "Well, I write books." And she said, "Oh, you're the football guy?" And, I said, "Well, I wrote one book about football." And she said, "Yeah, I've never read you because I don't like football." And I said, "I've written a lot of books that are not about football." And she said, "Well, like what?" And I named a few, and she'd heard of all of them.
Right.
And then I said, and she said, "What are you doing now?" And I said, "Well, I just got this book out about Dickens and Prince." And she said, "Oh, I just read a whole article about that in the newspaper." So she knew everything, but the name, the only recognition she had was the football. And I think I get that a lot in England. I'm the football guy. I'm the
Yeah.
football guy. And I don't mind. And in fact, I once ran into the coach of Arsenal Football Club, the coach for a long time, a Frenchman called Arsene Wenger, and he said to me, "But why no second book?" And I said, "Oh no, there have been some others." And he said, "But you are okay for a job?" And I said, "No, it's gone okay since the first one." And he was like relieved, and I didn't get into Emmys and Oscars and things. But,
You didn't tell him
no.
You should pull out your resume. Just show him your
But
award.
it was very sweet that he was worried.
Worried for your career.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have written a lot of one of my favorite movies in education you wrote, and I love Brooklyn.
If
And
those who can't hear Jessica, she said one of her favourite movies is An Education.
Yeah, it is.
I wrote that movie.
Yes, you wrote. It's one of my all-time favorite movies.
Okay.
It's on my list, my 10, one of my all-time. Oh, our son. Yeah. He dresses well.
Yes, he does.
So one of my all-time favorite movies is An Education. I love Brooklyn. That was amazing. Wild, and then I like the movies of your books, but you didn't write those scripts. You let other people write them, which I find a little frustrating because my favorite movies are the ones you wrote. My favorite books are the ones you wrote, but the movies of your books I like a lot. I like the movies you wrote better. So why don't you write your own movies? Why do you hand them over to someone else?
Well, first of all, if I wrote them, I don't think you'd like them as much as you like them now, because I wouldn't have done as good a job on the scripts. Most movies take like 4 to 5 years, I would say, to make, book to film, and 2 years to write. So I'm looking at a possible 6 or 7 year commitment to the same piece of material. And I don't have that interest in that material. While I have ideas for something else, I would like to do something else. And then
But to be clear, you're not writing, I mean, because I've seen you work, you're not writing for 2 years straight a script. You write 3 months a draft, you send it in.
Yeah, but it's hard to do that much else.
Right.
Because you're waiting for notes. In fact, that's how come I wrote State of the Union, which is this 10-minute TV series that I was waiting for people, and I couldn't embark on something big, so I thought I'd fill the time on something small, and it was very enjoyable to do, but it keeps coming back, and you think, oh man, this again. I did my first book, I adapted Fever Pitch into a movie, an English movie, starring Colin Firth, in fact. And I did that because when I was asked, I'd never written a movie. I didn't know if I had another book in me. I was writing High Fidelity, but I didn't know whether it would go anywhere. And I thought, I had a kid, and I thought I'd be very stupid to turn work down. So I just kept going with that screenplay, and eventually it got made. But the next time I was asked, I thought, oh, if this is going to happen again, I really want to get out of it now. So High Fidelity I didn't do, About a Boy I didn't do, etc. And I decided that the only thing I could do was decide whether I liked the people and trusted the people, and if I did, then let them go. And I don't think people ever set out to make a bad movie. There are all kinds of problems with budgets and trying to get the right cast and the right director, and I don't think I've ever had a bad movie made of any of my books, and some of them I love. I think High Fidelity is
great.
terrific.
Yeah. And so is About a Boy.
And About a Boy is terrific.
Yeah. That's great. Juliet Naked was
Juliet
great.
Naked.
Yeah, that was great. That's true. That was great.
Yeah.
And Fever Pitch was great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm just interested in what they do with it, and also I'm at this point, or the last 10, 15 years, I've been very keen to meet people who don't do exactly the same thing as me, and a lot of good relationships have come from these things. Like Stephen Frears, who made High Fidelity, is one of my closest friends, and he's a fellow Arsenal fan, and he made State of the Union with me, and that's been a very very rich relationship that I've been able to make through these movies, especially if they go abroad, because if they go to America, tend to get better directors, better cast, more money.
Right.
Not for me, I mean more money for me.
So you've done the TV series State of the Union. You got Emmys. You did the movies. You have Oscar nominations. You've done nonfiction. You've done fiction. You wrote songs with Ben Folds and did an album. So what haven't you conquered yet? What do you want to do that you haven't done yet?
Well, I'd like to do something for the theatre. I would like to persuade Ben Folds to write a musical with me. I'm not having any luck so far. And I've been thinking recently about some kind of play as well, without music. I'm not very good at going to the theatre. If there's an interval, I'm usually off, like a greyhound at half time. Intermission. Usually the intermission, I find myself suddenly out on the street thinking, because I'm smoking, and I think, do I really want to go back in? And then I don't. Yeah. So I'd like to write a play that would keep someone like me in for the entire... I mean, one thing is to make it shorter than most plays.
Right.
So a short play...
Maybe no intermission.
No, I think that's cruel. 2 45 minutes, like a football match.
Like a football match.
Yeah, that seems good to me.
Yeah, and then would there be an overtime if there was like something happening?
Well, I guess if they were slow.
Yeah, that's good. So, and then if you've done, I don't know if people know Desert Island Discs, you know, if you're stuck on a desert
yeah.
island. So you've done that, but if you were on a desert island, would you want to take records or books? Like if you had to choose between one of the two, because both are so important to you. You can only take one, you can't take both.
Well, do you have an unlimited supply of both?
Let's say, what's Desert Island Discs? 5?
Well, you take 8 songs, and you're allowed Shakespeare in the Bible, which I think I turned down when I turned down the Bible when I went on.
Desert Island.
I said I'd rather have another book than the Bible. And one other book.
Okay, so
And-
no books and just music, or no music and just books? 10
Well, I
10
need
each.
to know 10 each.
They all say 10 each.
No, well, there's no. I would rather have 10 big books
10 big books.
that lasted me. I mean, I'm being purely pragmatic.
Yeah.
I think 10 songs by Tuesday, you're going to wish.
10 albums.
Even then, 10 albums by February, you're going to wish that you'd chosen books.
Right.
You could always eat a book.
All right, so he said 30 minutes and we're going a little over. Is there anything
That's
else you want to say before we do questions? And
No,
mostly
I
my
haven't.
questions that I forgot, that I haven't been able to read. Because I can't read my writing. I can't read the print, it's too small.
When David here said you can eat books, I once talked to a round the world yachtswoman who had read High Fidelity on her round the world journey, but they do this thing of tearing it out a page at a time because of the weight on the boat.
What if you want to go back and read something? I always
Well,
go back
her
and
main
read.
job was being a round the world yachtswoman. I think she thought, if I really love it, I'll buy a paperback when I get home.
Right.
Yeah, she wasn't worried about rereading.
And then does she keep the cover to remember she read it?
No, I think when it was over, it went in the sea.
To the
So if you're looking, you might find a washed up page of High Fidelity. You'll know where it came from.
Okay, and then just last thing, because we are in Santa Barbara and these are all the amazing Santa Barbara people, like greatest people ever. So if you just want to say what you have loved about this town.
Well, pretty much everything, actually. I am so happy to have spent time in this light by the sea.
Right.
And England is just so... I mean, England's kind of really depressed anyway, given the state of the country.
Right.
But in January, when it's dark at 3:30, but it never really got light anyway,
Right.
it really feels like an incredible thing to be able to have this weather and right by the sea. And I've been swimming in a wetsuit most days, and it's been amazing.
And you have been writing. You
And I have been writing.
You can write even
Yes.
when you're happy.
Yes.
And it's sunny.
Yes.
You do not have to
It's
be
weird.
depressed
I'm
to
trying
write.
to adapt a book that's set in Glasgow,
Yeah.
and I've had to use every ounce of my imagination. It's like, I don't understand how people live like this.
Okay, well, last thing, you just want to say what I know you're working on like 4 things right now. If you want to tell people what you're working on. All movies, right?
Yeah,
Great.
I've adapted. There's a string of things that I've adapted which have all disappeared. So it's the kiss of death for me. But one is a book called Sorrow and Bliss, which I really love, by Meg Mason, Australian writer, and I've been adapting that for a TV series. A long-held desire of mine is to adapt Elizabeth McCracken's The Giant's House, which is I've finished, and we've now got a director and are looking for money. And there's another one by Adrienne Brodeur, a memoir called Wild Game, which I've been doing.
And the dog one.
The dog.
The Susan Orlean one.
Oh, I'm about to start adapting Susan Orlean's amazing book about Rin Tin Tin, the movie dog, which is one of the greatest non-fiction books I've read. I mean, everything she writes is great.
No,
but
she's amazing.
yeah.
So you're fine not writing a novel right now?
I am. I have an idea for one, but I'll get to it when
This is all
over.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so do we have questions?
Hello.
Have you read any good books lately?
Have I read any? Yes. I've read a ton of good books. There are 2 that are about to come out that I really recommend. One is a non-fiction book called Monsters by Claire Dederer, which is a series of essays about what we are supposed to think and do about Roman Polanski, Woody Allen, what we do as consumers with these things, and it's a very brilliant book. The other one is a novel that's about to come out called Everything's Fine, which is a sort of state of the nation love story, which ends with Trump's inauguration. And of course, it's not that recent anymore, but Jessica Anya Blau's Mary Jane is a wonderful novel. Hi.
Hi. What do you think of the reboot of High Fidelity?
The TV show.
The TV show. I thought it was great. It was really interesting for me because lots of people asked me if I was ever going to write a sequel to the novel, and I could never think what Rob would be doing in those years when there were no record stores really. And then they came back, and I still couldn't write it for Rob because I thought, well, Rob's like in his 50s now, and he's had to have been doing something else for the last 30
But he
years.
probably still hasn't grown up.
Still hasn't grown up. So to gender swap for a younger generation, I thought was really interesting, and I was kind of very proud that the book has gone on to mean something to generations other than my own as well. Because you think when you've got a book out, you think, oh, everyone my age is reading it. Oh, and now they've got older with me, and they're all reading it still. But when books skip generations and get handed on from parents to kids, that really feels good. It feels like you're kind of getting somewhere. Hello.
Hi, I'm curious what your process is in terms of, do you have it all mapped out, chaptered, or are you free-flowing? Tell me about what that looks like.
I am so embarrassed about my process. It's taken me these 30 years to actually confess what it is, which is to read the paper, play Words with Friends, play Wordle, then Quordle, Octordle, and now Waffle. And then maybe start a crossword. and then look at what I did yesterday, get depressed, hope that someone else has played me at Words with Friends since I played first thing in the morning. And I try and aim at like words or pages. Words if I'm writing fiction or non-fiction, number of pages if I'm writing a screenplay. And round about 3 in the afternoon, I start to feel so sick with myself at my own lack of achievement, and it starts to pick up a little bit. And I've very rarely mapped anything out. Most of it's done on the hoof. I have characters and a kind of beginning and a middle and an end, but like tentpole things. That's what I start with. I tend to know the characters quite well, and I've thought about them for a while. I mean, when I said just now that I have a book that I'm thinking about, I'm not going to be able to write it probably for a year because of the other stuff, and by the time I get there, I will know quite a lot more about the people in the book and what the book is about. But no, it's really, really an awful writing process that I wouldn't recommend to anybody. Makes me incredibly unhappy, but I'll be retired soon. So it's more or less lasted me a lifetime. Hope it helps.
Two more questions. Okay. Oh.
So if High Fidelity and About a Boy are like your Highway 61 revisited, what would you consider to be your Blood on the Tracks or your Time Out of Mind?
I guess How to Be Good is my Blood on the Tracks.
Yeah.
That's my breakup book, which ends miserably with a family splintering.
Right.
So there's Blood on the Tracks. What else?
Time Out of Mind.
Time Out of Mind.
Great career masterpiece.
My career masterpiece. And you think?
What do you think?
I don't know. I'm really proud of An Education because even though it's an adaptation, it came from a 7-page essay. So I had to do, I really had to imagine the whole thing. And the journey of An Education, which was like, I can't tell you how often we were knocked back for money. It took a long time, and the journey that ends with Oscar nominations was really extraordinary, and I still get something out of that movie and watching the performances. I like Funny Girl because I wanted to write about collaborative work, and that came out of the collaborative work that I'd done for movies. So that's a book I'm kind of pleased with. There's a I think good TV series coming out in England at least next month, so it might be here.
Great.
This is sort of a cheating question. I want to ask if I can talk to you afterwards because you and I were at school together. You won't remember me, but I was at Maidenhead High School and you were at the grammar school.
Oh!
And Barbara Houseman and Penny.
No!
But you were in a very cool crowd.
I told you! She wouldn't believe me.
It's amazing to have seen your career.
How
because
funny.
of course
So you're at school with my sister,
What was your sister's name?
Jill Hornby.
Yes, but I can't picture her.
Oh, she's 2
I'm
years younger
I'm
than
your
me.
age, so-
All right. Well,
so-
she was doing her O levels when you were doing your A levels.
Yeah, and I think you once gate crashed a party that I had. You came with a few others.
He claims he traveled with a group of 40 people to parties.
It was a few. It wasn't that many. There was a bunch of them who came to the door.
Right. Okay. We probably didn't get it let in either.
All right, what,
I'll say hello afterwards anyway.
Thank you.
any last, one more?
Hi.
What, other than football, what are the other sports that you follow?
Any other sports apart from football? Well, my younger sons are obsessed with basketball, and so I have to follow the Warriors because of Steph Curry. Steph Curry means as much to my youngest son as Mesut Ozil of Arsenal meant to him. He thinks he's a genius, the best sportsman in any field at the moment, which is kind of interesting for me to hear about. And in the summer, I do follow cricket, only the test matches. English cricket, there are, the regular season is played between counties, not clubs, and it's watched by about 7 or 8 people per day. And then the test matches between England and other countries are pretty popular. But it's a game, if you don't know it, it lasts for 5 days and it's usually a tie. So it's, you know, it's pretty good. It's kind of like a joke on Americans.
Last question, actually.
Yeah,
Arsenal's at the top of the table now.
yes.
Are you
Expound.
feeling optimistic about Arsenal?
I am feeling optimistic about Arsenal, not just for this season, but for the next few seasons, because they have it's the youngest team in the Premiership. They have 4 or 5 players who clearly will be the basis of the team for years to come. So it doesn't feel to me like if they miss it this year, that's it for another 15 years. It feels like they're going to be challenging for the next few years. I think people went a bit crazy with the World Cup because this break in the middle of the season, it divided into a first half and a second half in the way that seasons normally don't. So the second half of the season has started off with everyone talking about this being the run-in. And it's not. It's like there are 19 games, 18 games left. They could be way behind in about a month's time. So I think it's way too early to get optimistic. But I've really enjoyed watching them. They're so likeable and they're so talented. And that's so different from the last 10 years.
Well, I know they're going to win. You know why?
Why?
Because you came here to see.
I think a lot of people at home would say that's why we're not going to.
The English aren't optimistic. I've discovered it's only an American trait.
That's true. That's true. Well, regardless, you're going to be on the other side of the pond, so we won't have to worry about that.
I'm really superstitious, and while I've been here, I received an email from the Times newspaper in England saying, I know this might seem early days, but after Arsenal has won the championship, would you write a piece for us the following day? And I was like, you cannot talk about it. There was an Arsenal fan who asked me as well, so I was really angry with him.
Well, win or lose, thank you very much for joining us. Line up right down the center. The signed books are available behind the